Good afternoon, and welcome to Generous Futures, Women of Color Challenging, and happy International Women's Day. My name is Pam Sugerman, and I'm Dean of the Faculty of Arts at Ryerson University. We're very excited about this panel today, and we can't wait to dive into the discussion. But before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that Toronto is in the Dish with One Spoon territory. The Dish with One Spoon is a treaty between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. Subsequent Indigenous nations and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. As a racialized Japanese Canadian woman whose family was uprooted, dispossessed, interned, and forcibly removed during the Second World War, I give this land acknowledgement not as a performative gesture, but rather as one of many more profound acts of reconciliation and redress to Indigenous peoples in Canada. I'm thrilled to be moderating this panel in the Generous Futures series. Generous Futures brings the diverse identities, experiences, and perspectives of the philanthropic community to the forefront. It's a unique series that explores how charitable giving intersects with Black leadership, women of color, newcomers to SLGBTQ+ communities, and Indigenous perspectives. Before we begin the discussion, I'd like to thank our lead sponsor of this series, TD Bank Group, for helping to advance these important discussions. TD Bank Group has been a great supporter of Ryerson, and we are delighted that they have joined us on this journey of understanding. Today, on International Women's Day, we are shining a spotlight on the experiences of women in color in charitable giving. We'll look at how women of color are supporting one another through philanthropy. We'll address some of the challenges and opportunities, and we'll ask if the glass ceiling is really breaking, and if so, for whom is it not breaking? I'll pose questions first to the panel, and following this, time permitting, I'll ask our panelists to respond to questions submitted by you in advance. Today's discussion is being recorded, and a link to the video will be emailed to you following the event. I encourage you to share the video to all in your networks. Now, I'm delighted to introduce you to our panel of leaders. You will have all read their biographies, but when you registered on our website, allow me to share one interesting insight about our panelists, each of them. Anju Vermani is not only the CIO of CargoJet, but her extraordinary giving to women in STEM initiatives has led to new and important access programs in higher education. Self-proclaimed geek, Anju is also a self-taught, accomplished visual artist, and her art pieces have found homes at Ryerson University, corporate and medical offices, as well as in many private residences. Welcome, Anju.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Donette Chin Loy Chang is a Ryerson University alumna and communications leader, philanthropist, and volunteer. She, along with her late husband, G. Raymond Chang, are amongst Canada's most prolific philanthropists, with their giving extending worldwide. Donette is an honorary degree recipient of Ryerson and the University of the West Indies. In 2016, she was part of the University Health Network $1 billion campaign. Recently, she was also appointed to the board of the Black North Initiative and serves on the Onyx Initiative Advisory Board, two Canadian organizations founded in response to the rallying cry for social justice and equity. Donette was formerly co-chair of Food for the Poor Canada and has mentored dozens of students in both Canada and the Caribbean. Her giving is always informed by lifelong learning, a great believer in health and wellness, modeled by her athletic parents. And Donette is now an avid CrossFit and hot yoga practitioner as well. Welcome, Donette.
Thank you, Pamela. Happy International Women's Day.
And Naki Osute has not only led a number of charitable initiatives, but as the AVP of Social Impact at TD, she and her team are responsible for advancing partnerships with charities and organizations with one of Canada's most respected financial institutions. Naki, on a more personal note, is a lover of stories and storytelling, and she has worked as a TEDx Toronto speaker coach and curator. Naki recently participated in her first outdoor audio storytelling exhibit with Harbourfront's Kumbha Festival. Welcome, Naki.
Thank you so much, Pamela. It's great to be here.
What an amazing panel we have today. I'd like to start by asking the same question to all of you, all of the panelists. Anju, perhaps we could start with you. Then we'll move on to Donette and then Naki. So the first question is, what is your first memory of generosity? And how do your memories influence your perspective on this topic? Please go ahead, Anju.
Okay, so I'm sure I've had many occasions in my life as a child where I was shown generosity. But what stands out most is when I was at a very transitionary point in my life, I needed to go to school. And this is after I immigrated to Canada. And the cost of my education was $1,200 for a whole certificate program. And I didn't have the money. And I remember that my sister, out of the blue, sent me that $1,200 for my education. And that literally forever changed my life. So that's my first experience of real generosity from people who didn't have that kind of money to give.
Thank you, Anju. That's very, very touching and poignant. Let's turn to you now, Donette.
My first experience with giving is watching my parents within their community. And something stands out for me is a young man came to my father's restaurant and recording studio for a job. The night before, he was actually asked to drive a getaway car in an inner city in Kingston, Jamaica. And he did not drive that car. He came in and asked for a job, and my dad asked him, "Have you eaten?" And he said no, and my parents fed him. What I've learned from that, watching my parents over the years, is that food is always very critical, and everything is always around food. Have you eaten? Come and eat. And so I have also learned that my parents were not just feeding a physical person, but also a soul. So for that, I'm very grateful for my parents. And after that, that's where my own awareness of giving came in.
Thank you, Donette. That's a really powerful memory. And Naki.
Yeah, mine is not too far from Donette's story, actually. So when we moved here from Ghana in the late 70s, my family arrived and lived in a high-rise tower at Weston Road and Finch. And I can remember on our 24th floor, each apartment unit housed a family from somewhere in the world: Argentina, Jamaica, Barbados, Brazil. And one of my earliest memories of generosity was the way this floor of people and sort of network of families helped each other, because we were all in a similar situation as far as being newcomers to Canada. Mothers had jobs, some were staying at home and acting as caregivers at home. And those who could would take the other's children and take care of them, or make sure that someone else's child had somewhere to go after school and had food, to Donette's earlier point. So just that going above and beyond, like it could have been very easy for each family to just think about themselves and their needs, but they thought about everyone's needs on this 24th floor in the middle of Toronto. And that notion of generosity has always stayed with me. But I think how it's affected me in the work I do today is that I think about all of the unpaid labor that women in particular do that we need to recognize as labor.
Thank you very much, Naki. Thanks to everyone. I can certainly see the relationship between those early experiences and, formative experiences and memories, and your relationship to philanthropy today. Now I'd like to ask Anju a question about being a leader in the information technology industry. How do your lived experiences inform, both personally and professionally, inform your charitable passions? And if you have a story you could share with us to reflect that, that would be wonderful.
Well, thanks, Pam, for asking. As I just mentioned, that I was the recipient of generosity in getting further or getting a foothold in my education. And that was my first introduction to information technology. I noticed that I was the only woman in my class. As I finished my education, like the whole world opened up to me because I was actually financially independent. I was able to create a life for me and my children because I had an education that could sustain my lifestyle of feeding my children and getting them to school. And I was a single mother at that time. So as I progressed through my technology experience, I realized more and more that I was one of the very few women on the table in the field of technology, and it was totally dominated by men. And, I go back a long way. So I would say, most of them were men, white men, and one or two out of 20 would be a woman. And this didn't change. It hasn't changed much to this day. And I've been in this field now for more than 40 years. And so when I was looking to hire people in my teams, all I would get is male applicants, which actually changed in the last 4 or 5 years. But then I thought about, we talk about supporting women and enhancing their education and making them self-sufficient. In that journey, how can I help other women the way I was helped? And fortunately for me, I met one of the Ryerson young ladies. I would mention her, Michelle. And over the years, I started to attend events at Ryerson and around entrepreneurship, around women and leadership. A whole different world opened up to me. And she developed a relationship with me and identified what I could do to give back to a cause that certainly, resonated with me. And that was education of women in STEM. My mother, who's turning 98 next week, God bless her, is a math teacher. To this day, she's, she counts in her head. She's been the educator of our whole family. So it seemed very befitting to support people, young ladies who were studying in STEM programs at Ryerson. So that actually resonated with me and my family's mission with our passion for education so well that, I said, well, this is a winning combination. And then that's what led me to my story of giving with Ryerson.
Thank you, Anju. That's very inspiring. Donette, you've had a remarkable career in communications and media. How has your philanthropy impacted on other women of color? And why, in your view, is this important?
My career in media was not a straight path. I graduated from Ryerson journalism. And what I realized was how shy and reticent I was about my face and about my accent. So though I did get a job at the CBC, it was in the international service. There were not many eyes that looked like mine back then. So it made me very aware of how different I was. And quite frankly, I did not feel as welcomed as, as I guess it could have been. Adrian Clarkson, I believe, was probably the only face that I saw back then that resembled mine. And so my job at the CBC was then with the international service. Of course, as you can imagine, it was a combination of several language departments and several countries that were represented, amongst them the Caribbean, Africa, Eastern Europe, and so forth. And so I went into radio, funny enough, and then became a producer at the CBC at the local level. So I was always behind the cameras mostly. Whenever my voice was heard, it was heard in the Caribbean, which was, which was familiar to the Caribbean naturally, because I have a voice from the Caribbean. And in fact, this morning only, I was looking on one of the networks, Canadian networks, and I thought to myself, there was an Australian accent. I believe it was Australian. And I said to my mother, now tell me, do you understand what she's saying? And my mom says, well, sort of. I said, do you understand my accent and the very English that I speak, the very, proper English I speak? She says, oh, yes. I said, well, back in the day, after you sacrificed for me to go to university, I was too shy to be on television, but listen to that accent. I said, you see who is now on the TV back then and now? It hasn't changed that much, to Anjou's point. And so when I give with the notion that people like me and us get a chance to not feel not confident, to feel more empowered, and to be able to not feel embarrassed or ashamed of their visage, their faces, or their accents, because there is room for all of us. And so, I then went into public relations afterwards and got the job of a lifetime when the Prime Minister of Jamaica called and said he wanted to hire PR people from all over the world. So I'm very grateful for my differences, because I've used them like hell to get really where I wanted to be.
That's wonderful to hear, especially on International Women's Day. I think many in our audience would share your experiences. Thank you, Donette. And Naki, the focus on equity inclusion through the TD Ready commitment is something that has inspired many organizations. Could you tell us why this is important for TD Bank, and what lessons have been learned from initiatives that support racialized women in particular?
Thank you for the question. I always love talking about the TD Ready commitment. When we launched it just almost exactly 3 years ago today, we were very intentional about acknowledging that diversity, equity, inclusion cut across everything that we do. So we have a sort of aspiration to open more doors to a more inclusive and sustainable tomorrow. So right baked within our aspiration is this desire to have a more inclusive future. And so when we think about that, whether it be in the realm of financial security or initiatives around health or initiatives around our Connected Communities driver, which is all about belonging and shared experiences, or whether it's about our driver that's focused on the environment, our Vibrant Planet driver, inclusion, equity cut across each of them. And so with that knowledge, it was really important for us to look at each of those issues through the lens of a range of marginalized or traditionally marginalized groups. So if I take the case of women, when we look at the experience of women through a financial security lens, we know that women, whether it's about pay equity, whether it's about division of work, as I mentioned in my earlier remarks about about how even the work around the home is not equally divided. We know that women have a lot that they're up against. And so when we think about organizations we want to support, we want to be able to support organizations that will help drive more equitable outcomes for women amongst other groups. The other piece I want to mention with respect to our philanthropic giving and its connection to equity, diversity, and inclusion is that, COVID-19 showed us really, really clearly how integrated all of these issues are. We see that, when we talk about the recession that's forthcoming, many have begun calling it a she session. So again, we know that the experience of women across any of these major intractable issues is different, and we do need to take some time to examine them. The second thing, a related point, is issues around equity, whether it's about women or other equity-seeking groups. These issues are constantly changing, and this journey is ongoing. So what's been really important for TD, and one of the things I'm really proud that we do, is we talk to our community partners. We get a sense from those who are doing the work on the front lines of what's changing, what new supports might be what new needs might be emerging, what issues are bubbling up that we should be paying close attention to. And I think that ongoing dialogue is really important when we want to talk about supports for all groups, but in particular for women and racialized women.
Thank you so much, Naki. And I apologize for a little bit of background noise. This is what happens when you are working from home. My apologies. And I know we do want to save some time for questions from the audience, but I have a few more questions for each of you, specifically from me. Anju, let's turn to you. What should the next generation of women in color expect from their experience with philanthropy?
I think there is a lot to expect, a lot of good feelings to expect from your experiences. Not just for women of color, but anybody who wants to be philanthropist, although I personally am not comfortable with that term, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later. But the joy in doing some good comes from when you hear personal stories. When my first and second cohort of scholarship recipients reached out to me after the scholarships were announced, and they shared their personal stories with me, I had tears running down my face. It touched me so deeply that, like, a small gesture on my part could impact their lives so profoundly. And I shouldn't be surprised, because I had been through that experience myself. So there's a joy in giving, and there's a joy in sharing, and it's not just about financial resources. Somebody who gives of their time to mentoring young women, or to giving their time to the community to build up resilience in their communities. There's a monetary value on even everybody's time. So when we talk about, giving and receiving, it's mutually beneficial to the giver and the receiver. That there's a special bond, which I think leads to further, paying it forward. Once you receive generosity, you want to pay it forward. It's an innate human feeling that comes along. So I think the experiences will be awesome for anybody who chooses to give back to their communities, build resilience in their communities, help in the education of women and moving women forward. I think it's amazing that we all commit to that.
Great. Thank you so much, Anju. And Jonette, we often hear stereotypes, much too often, of women of color as challenging, problematic, angry, loud, defensive. I hear these stereotypes myself, and especially if we want to assert ourselves. What is your perspective on this narrative?
Oh my, all those things are we. Of course we are. But I just wanted for a second to pick up on something Anju said, if I may. The word philanthropy. I feel the same way you do, Anju. It seems a bit lofty or maybe elitist, or maybe out of reach And so I like to, I used to call myself, or I still call myself, a do-gooder. And in doing good, you actually get such great satisfaction. It feeds your soul, and in doing so, somebody benefits from your time and perchance your resources. But to go back to the question, Pamela, about the angry, well, listen, I was born in Jamaica, and I'm what I call multiracial. I didn't come from a wealthy family, but certainly education was what my parents gave us, at great sacrifice, by the way, because, as I said, we were, they were able to do so because it was critical. I have never met a woman of color who was not stereotyped. I'm stereotyped every day. I've been stereotyped since I was born, because I'm not a minority in any country I've ever lived, and I will never be, by dint of culture, language, and color, race. So when I first started Ryerson, the first week of Ryerson, a male student said to me, I hear that island women are free. And you must understand how that may have gone over with me, having come from, somewhere else where we don't speak like that to, well, I was never spoken with like that. So I did answer him. And only a few weeks ago, again, I was racialized in the supermarket, of all places, over food again. Here we go again. So a woman commented on my driving. She says, I hope you don't drive that way. Because of the way I was pushing my supermarket cart, it became, this thing. And I realized that people, have been under stress, are in lockdown, and all the pressures that go with this pandemic. But what I will tell you is that I've never backed down from not answering. And the stereotype, of course, is that I would not answer, because I look one way, but culturally, I act another way. But even then, I implore young women and women of color, all women, all people who are racialized, to answer, to speak your truth. And we have been speaking in hushed tones for so long. Maybe it's time for us to now speak loudly, or to notch it up where we are able, and to arm ourselves, get educated, get knowledge, arm ourselves with the knowledge and the tools that will make us more confident, that will make us, able to walk into a room and to know that we belong, because there is enough space for everybody. Or to make sure that we take up our seat on that bus, because there are enough seats for everybody. So this is how I see it. Thank you.
Couldn't agree with you more, Donette. I completely support what you're saying. And Nucky, women of color are giving to many causes, both formally and informally. Some are doing so publicly, and others prefer to give quietly. In your view, how important is the public visibility of women of color in giving, and why do you feel this way?
Thank you for that question. And I'm going to speak about that from two perspectives, both type of giving that I do in my role at TD. So there's a philanthropic component to my role. But then I want to jump back to the conversation that Andrew and Donette were having about the term philanthropist and the type of philanthropy that they do. And what I will say about the latter is I can appreciate not wanting to embrace the term philanthropist. But at the same time, I think that there's something to be said for reimagining who a philanthropist is. And to be sitting in this conversation with two women of color who are incredible philanthropists is a really powerful challenge to historical ideas of who philanthropists are. And so there's something to be said for the visibility. And even as I look around at bios that I see on social media platforms, more and more people are adopting the term philanthropist that aren't sort of the staunch representation of philanthropists that we've come to know about. The other point in that realm that I want to make is I used to work on the other side of the table that I sit on today. And I worked in roles where I was doing the asking for philanthropic dollars. And I can remember looking at capital campaigns and walking around the city and seeing names on buildings that people had been able to name, whether it was in honor of a family member or for themselves. And in some ways, those names on buildings are representative of who belongs in this city. And so I think when we talk about visibility of philanthropists, there's power to that if an individual is comfortable with that visibility. But that power is not just about themselves and what they've done and their generosity, but it's also about what that represents in terms of who's here, who's building the story in these ways. To flip it over to philanthropic giving in the way that I do it in my job, I think it's important for me to be visible in this role because it does speak to an intersectional lens that can be brought to the kind of philanthropic work that TD does. So as a woman, as a Black woman, as a woman who immigrated here from Ghana as a child, I come to this work with all of those perspectives. And I think that lens informs decision-making, it informs the kinds of questions that I ask, it informs the kinds of people who approach the organization. And so this visibility, I think, is important, but I would never want to encourage visibility when, if an individual doesn't feel comfortable with it. If, in the instance where an individual is comfortable with it, let's get out there and show ourselves.
Thank you, Naki. And I see others are nodding in agreement. And actually, this is a coincidence because this is one of the questions that did come from the audience. The question is, should the term philanthropist be taken back? Who gets to be called a philanthropist? And should the term be reserved to those with only the greatest capacity to give? And I'm hearing from all of you that no, the term shouldn't be reserved only for those who have the greatest amount of wealth to give. Would anyone else like to, Anju or Donette, like to comment on this as well?
Yeah, I would. And maybe I'll speak about some of the reasons I feel that I am uncomfortable with the term. It almost immediately implies that I have a lot of money and I'm in a position of power, and that doesn't make it an equal field. And I've seen on LinkedIn a lot of people write in their bios they're philanthropists and other adjectives of that sort. But when I think philanthropist can be reserved for people who have a whole lot of money. And I don't have a whole lot of money, but yet I choose to give a portion of what I have to do for the better good of the community that I live in. So people who give of their time or people who give of their skill set. Perhaps we need another name for people who don't want to be identified as philanthropists. And the other thing I want to say is, giving it's a very gradual thing. You're not born with like, oh, I'm born rich and I'm going to be giving of myself. In other words, charity begins at home. So first you take care of your own needs, your own little family, and then there's a circle. As your circles get bigger and bigger, that's when you start looking at, how can I give back to this, Now that my own family is secure, I've taken care of my own obligations. Now I can do for the bigger community, right? So there's stages in one's life where financially you can only help at a certain point. But with your time and skill set, you can do that at any stage of your life, right? So to me, philanthropy is giving back for a greater good, and it doesn't have to be financial, although I think currently philanthropy is considered financial, private financial resources for greater good of the community, right? So on the other hand, I do agree with Naki as well, that how do you encourage other people like yourself to give? So I've had my friends reach out to me and said, well, you started a scholarship. Well, what did it cost? How did it happen? And believe it or not, because they knew what I was doing, I've had at least 3 or 4 other friends who've started to do smaller scholarships in the field of education that they were interested in or that their families supported. So in that name, yes, I would definitely love to encourage other people. I wish there was another name rather than philanthropy for doing that. That's all. So thanks for letting me say that.
Donette, did you, perhaps Donette has a suggestion.
I suggested
Donette, did you want to add
do-gooder.
some thoughts?
Sorry, I had suggested do-gooder. In fact, I always call Ray, my husband, the biggest do-gooder I know, because he did it with such heart, and and I was so close to that. So it's all semantics, really. I really actually get Anju's point, because I agree, and I agree with Naki as well. And it was when Naki pointed out some days ago in our prior discussions about, the name on the building, and it represented, if you will, a new Canada, a new Toronto, a new day, that if we are saying authentically that we're to take up space, and we keep saying this and we keep doing it by our actions, then surely we need some names up there on naming opportunities, as and so I got it some years ago when Ryerson approached Ray to name the G. Raymond Chang building. He was terrified because he was a very shy man, and it caused him a bit of a sleepless time. And then he got it as well, in that, listen, it's not just about you and your name, it's about a whole set of people that you are bringing along with you. So so I say, Anju, let's stick to maybe philanthropy until we can find a new word.
Okay. Let's have a contest for that. What's a new word for something that doesn't imply that you have to be very wealthy to do that?
Yes, and perhaps a member of the audience has a suggestion for a new term.
And if I can add, Pamela,
Sure.
I love the idea of searching for a new term, because I think if we could find a new term that also reflects the do-gooding in other ways aside from money, because we've got people in our communities who give thousands and thousands of hours. And could that time not also be translated into, the same way that we look at financial donation? Can we look at that time in a similar fashion? And could those individuals not also be part of this group of people who are known for giving? And maybe there's a name, maybe there's a building named after a person who was a prolific volunteer of their time. I think it's time for us to recast the notion.
Maybe we'd have to do a fundraiser for that person, because if all they did was give their time, they didn't make money, hopefully, I don't know.
If the 3 of you would like to donate some time for a fundraiser, I am fully in support of that.
I'm all in for a good cause.
Yes. Oh, I think that you've all raised some excellent points, and I agree that if perhaps we used a different term, different language is very important.
Yes.
If we use a different term, then fundraising, philanthropy, etc., do-gooder acts would be more inclusive and not feel that it's something detached and reserved only for those who have a great amount of wealth. I think we have time for one more question, and then I'd like to ask a question from the audience, and then another question specific to all of you. But I'll turn to Donette. Donette, how does intersectionality, that is, the confluence of gender, race, and class, or sexual orientation, race, ability, disability, how does intersectionality influence your commitment to the charitable sector?
Pamela, that's such an interesting question, particularly at this time. My giving has always been, and the vision that Ray and I had for giving has always been about helping the most vulnerable. And when I say giving, we never give without following the money. We always try to be at the table to make decisions about, where the trail leads. So it's always been about the most vulnerable people, to give them the opportunity to rise and become their best selves. The pandemic, of course, has thrown a whole new light on philanthropy or giving. So over the last 2 years, I have further committed to initiatives that address the stark reality of injustice and inequity for women of color. And I can tell you, those initiatives include the Black North Initiative, the Onyx Initiative, the YMCA GTA Black Project Initiative. The YMCA, was done about 3 years ago because, there's just so much need for women of color and for people of color within our society. So to that point, yes, the ramping up of giving to women of color has become a focus for me more now.
Thank you, Donette. Naki, I actually think we do have a little bit more time for questions. This one is directed to you. The Unfunded Black Communities Overlooked by Canadian Philanthropy report, and you may be familiar with this report, had some really profound findings. One of the findings is that 0.7% of funds from the top community foundations in Canada were dispersed to Black serving organizations in 2017 and 2018. What can our attendees, regardless of their capacity to give, do to support Black serving organizations? And how could they go about doing this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a really important report, and it uncovered some really stark realities. I think some of these realities were well known to Black communities already, but it was helpful to see the data behind it. And I think, when I look at what we're doing at TD, I can say quite confidently that we are doing a lot to support Black-led, Black-serving, and Black-focused organizations. And in 2020 alone, donated up $11 million plus in support of organizations that we call 3B organizations: Black-led, Black-serving, Black-focused. But for listeners who are thinking about how they can support 3B organizations, I would say first, do a self-check to really reflect on why you want to support these organizations, and then why you want to, and then if you've got a specific organization, what is it about that organization that is compelling to you? take a look both at the leadership of that organization in terms of its executive director, senior leadership, et cetera, but also take a look at its board. And who is reflected on the board? Do you see that? Do you see Black leadership reflected there as well? And then the third thing to do would be to look at the communities that are supported by that organization. I think one of Donette's earlier points about wanting to serve the groups that have been made most vulnerable is an important one, and examining, the communities served by this organization. Are they amongst the groups who most need that support? And is this organization taking a long view? So is it just about a one-year trajectory, or is the organization taking a longer view? And once that sort of assessment is done, it's important then to also think, okay, what can I offer? But not just what can I offer, but what does the organization need? So again, returning to the whole notion of conversations and really asking organizations, how can I support you? What would be best for you at this time? And if it's your skills, if it's your time, if it's your social capital, I think that's an underused resource, because sometimes it's about opening doors to other opportunities. It might not be something that you individually can do, but maybe it's something that you have access to through your network. So, I think there's a variety of things to be done. But I think there are a few levels of engagement that begin with the person who wants to engage and why they want to do that.
Yes, thank you, Naki. And I think you raised an important point about social capital.
Mm-hmm.
And social capital is available to some groups and not something that other groups possess. So I think it's important to take that into account. Also, the point you raised about distinguishing between what you can give and what the organization actually needs. I think that's a very significant point to consider.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Now, the next question from the audience is addressed to Anju. Anju, what challenges have you overcome in your career, challenges as a woman of color in your career?
I would say that some challenges have been, are across the board for anybody who's a newcomer to a different country and looks different and talks different, but fundamentally can do the job that anyone can do. So challenges in terms of being not just a woman of color, but also being in a field that has no female or not enough female representation. The bigger challenge is to deal with the perception of others. So I'll give you an example recently. And this is not like 40 years ago when I first arrived in Canada. This is from a dinner a couple of years ago. As part of a C-suite person in technology, I was invited to a dinner at a local Toronto restaurant, and it was for tech leadership. And the dinner was organized by one of our vendors. And I walk in there, and I'm wearing, it's winter time, and I'm wearing Canada's favorite color, which is black. And I walk into the restaurant, and I walk into this private room where men are like, in clusters with drinks in their hands, and they're talking to each other. And I walk in, and two men turn around and give me their empty glasses. And their first assumption was, this is a woman of color. She's probably wearing black because that's part of her uniform, and that I'm the waitress here. So how do you deal with situations like that? It's extremely awkward. My first instinct was to just throw it back in their face. But of course, I couldn't do that. That wasn't very dignified. So I just, I took the glasses from them and I put it on the table behind me, and I said, "Hi, I'm Anju Ramani. I'm the CIO of Cargojet." And you should have seen the look on their face, because this is their perception of being leaders was not one of the face of Canada, the new face of Canada. So the challenges come not from your inabilities to do certain things. It comes from perceptions that other people have of what you're capable of doing and what you're not capable of giving at a technology table. So how do you overcome those challenges is by, first of all, if I was sitting at a round table like that, nobody's going to say to me, Anju, what do you think of this? So if I have something to say, speak up, because nobody's going to invite you to say if you want to be heard, you have to speak up. I also don't like the word empowering women. It implies that their power has been taken away. I like to say, you already have the power, exercise it. Anybody stands in your way, just tell them to get away, just get out of my way, because I'm going to say my thing. And to do that, you really, and it's not at every stage of your life you can do that, right? So you need to feel confident in what you're doing and be fearless at the same time, because speaking out also has consequences. So, and I'm not ashamed to admit that there were times that I was cowering down. I was trying to protect my job. I was trying to protect myself personally from all kinds of different types of assaults, whether they were verbal or in whatever way. And I didn't speak up. But I think there comes a time when the challenges come and you don't speak up, you'll never speak up. So to recognize that time when you know you can be heard, you have to do it. And don't be afraid to do it.
Exactly. And everything you have said really resonates, I'm sure, with everyone on this panel. Now, I know we are running a little bit short on time, so I'd like to just get some final thoughts. I mean, I'd love to go on because there are so many wonderful questions from the audience. But in closing, I'd like to look into the future. So to all panelists, could you give us one statement that gets to the heart of your perspective on the future of generosity or the future of giving?
Can I start off?
Sure.
Okay, so I'm a techie. I believe in automation. I believe in using the power of automation to ease human life. But I just want to say that humanity is never going to go away. Machines cannot replace people. And the future of generosity is bright because the younger generation, the millennials, they have it better than us. And I don't mean that they have better than us, that they have more, but they are more aware of the problems of the environment, the climate, the racism, the systemic racism. I think with more awareness, the future is brighter.
Maybe I'll follow.
Yes, please.
I think that the future of giving or generosity is bold, it's intersectional, and it's about intersections. And I'll just quickly unpack that. I think, building, and the reason I wanted to go follow Andrew is I do think that the generations that are coming up are really intelligent and unapologetic, and they are tired. They're tired of watching change not happen or change happening in this glacial pace. So there's that boldness that's coming. When I say intersectional, I'm referencing this panel. There are more and more women from racialized communities who are doing this work. And so we're going to be getting perspectives that represent that. And then when I think about intersections, it's about the ways that issues, the intersection of issues is becoming more clear. With COVID-19, we saw how financial health and physical health are inextricably linked. We can see how social justice and environmental justice are linked. And so I see a future where we're boldly talking about these intersections through an intersectional lens.
Thank you, Naki. And your final thoughts, Donette? Oh, I think you're on mute.
I promise that would never happen. Sorry.
It always happens.
Anju and Naki said it so well and so, so passionately. But when the pandemic occurred, I tried to find the silver lining, as I always do in everything. And one of the silver linings was that we always talk about the world that we want to give our children and our grandchildren. And finally, here comes that world. Unfortunately, it is going to cause and has caused massive displacement, enormous deaths, and just, you know, things that we cannot even conceive here in this Western world. But I just want to say that on this International Day of Women, not only must women and young girls of color keep using their voices for change, but they must take it up a few decibels so that the echoes reverberate for those who come after and after and after. And in the words of activist Lima Marbowie, and she puts it this way: it is time for women to stop being politely angry. Thank you so much. We will get together again, the four of us, I know it.
Yes, I would love that. And I will be using that quote many times from now on. That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Anju, Donette, and Natalie, for being part of this panel. It was a great discussion. I wish we had more time. I wish we had a few more hours, but I know that you all are busy women and have many meetings after this and other commitments. But it's been a great discussion, lively, and a very important and timely one as well. I'd also like to send out a huge thank you to our lead sponsor of the Generous Futures panel series, TD Bank Group. Your leadership is truly commendable. And thank you as well to our promotional partners, the AFP, Greater Toronto Chapter, CAGP, Canada Helps, and Imagine Canada. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. Please look out for an email message in your inbox in the coming days with a link to a recording of the discussion, and please share it with all those within your networks. We also hope that you will join us on April the 28th for the next Generous Futures panel discussion. And this is called Newcomers Redefining. Details about the next event will accompany the recording that you receive in your inbox. Thank you again, and take care, everyone. Happy International Women's Day.